Namaskar and welcome to Global Scan. I'm Shubhendu Ghosh. This is your one-stop destination for a roundup of all the major global developments of the week. Joe Biden has said the United States will withdraw all his troops deployed in Afghanistan by September of 2021. That's on the anniversary of the devastating terror attack in New York. We will take a closer look at the implications in the show up ahead. New era of tensions between the US and Russia anticipated as sanctions diplomacy begins. Holy month of Ramzan in Bangladesh under shadow of COVID lockdown. Uproar over Japan's decision to discharge Fukushima waters into the sea. Sharp protests from South Korea in particular. Updates also on the Raisina Dialogue 2021 where Prime Minister Modi talked about shaping the new world order. All that and more in Global Scan. Let's get started with the top stories. In a big move, United States President Joe Biden announces withdrawal of all remaining US troops from Afghanistan by September 11. NATO troops to withdraw from Afghanistan too. Afghanistan President Ashraf Ghani says Afghan security forces, defense forces, fully capable of defending the people and the country. US ups the ante on China over its human rights record. Bipartisan resolution introduced in US House of Representatives condemning China's genocide of Uyghurs and other minorities, seeking sanctions against Chinese government at the UN Security Council to bring the genocide to an end. United States announces sanctions against Russia and expulsion of 10 diplomats in retaliation for what Washington says is Kremlin's US election interference, a massive cyber attack and other hostile activity. Russian government denies allegations and calls any new sanctions illegal. World battles COVID-19. Moderna Inc. says COVID-19 vaccine still shows strong protection against the illness. Pfizer CEO says the company has ramped up production of its COVID vaccine and can deliver 10% more doses than expected to US by the end of May. In sports, UEFA Champions semi-finals lineup confirmed. Spanish giants Real Madrid to face Chelsea in the last four of the tournament, while PSG takes on English club Manchester City for a spot in the finals. Meanwhile, Tokyo Olympic Organizing Committee marks 100-day countdown for the Summer Games. Let's get started with the news from Americas. And President Joe Biden made the big announcement this week. US will withdraw all the troops deployed in Afghanistan by 11th of September this year. That's 20 years after it began its military intervention in response to the 9/11 terror attacks. NATO, too, will be withdrawing its troops from Afghanistan starting May 1st. The baton is going to be handed over to Afghanistan's defense and security forces, with the Taliban as a mainstream stakeholder in the future of the country.
It's time to end America's longest war. It's time for American troops to come home.
US President Joe Biden finally announced his plans on Wednesday to withdraw remaining troops from Afghanistan, declaring that the September 11th attacks cannot explain why American forces should still be there 20 years after the deadliest terror assault on the United States. The pullout is to coincide with the 20th anniversary of the 11th September 2001 terror attacks. In a White House speech, Biden set a goal of withdrawing all 2,500 US troops remaining in Afghanistan no later than 11th of September, with the final withdrawal beginning on the 1st of May.
I'm now the fourth United States president to preside over American troop presence in Afghanistan. 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats. I will not pass this responsibility on to a fifth. After consulting closely with our allies and partners, with our military leaders and intelligence personnel, with our diplomats and our development experts, with the Congress and the Vice President, as well as with Mr. Ghani and many others around the world. We delivered justice to bin Laden a decade ago, and we've stayed in Afghanistan for a decade since. Since then, our reasons for remaining in Afghanistan have become increasingly unclear, even as the terrorist threat that we went to fight evolved.
Afghan President Ashraf Ghani on Wednesday tweeted that he had a telephonic conversation with President Joe Biden, during which both the leaders discussed the US decision to withdraw its force from early September. Ghani said the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan respects the US decision and will work with its US partners to ensure a smooth transition. Ghani added that Afghanistan will continue to work with its US NATO partners in the ongoing peace efforts. He also asserted that Afghanistan's security and defense forces are fully capable of defending its people and country, which they have been doing all along, and for which the Afghan nation will forever remain grateful. Australia will also withdraw its remaining 80 military personnel in Afghanistan.
Today, the government is announcing that Australia will conclude the drawdown of our contribution to the NATO-led Resolute Support Mission in Afghanistan. Over the past 2 years, we've been reducing our military presence in Afghanistan from a high of over 1,500 personnel to around 80 personnel currently. In line with the United States and our other allies and partners, the last remaining Australian troops will depart Afghanistan in September 2021. But safeguarding Afghanistan's security has come at a great cost to Australia. Since 2001, 41 Australian personnel have lost their lives while serving in Afghanistan, and many more were wounded, some physically, others mentally, and will be dealing with the scars, both mental and physical, of their service for many, many years.
Morrison read out the names of the 41 Australian soldiers who died since 2001 in the conflict, in which more than 39,000 Australian Defence Force personnel were deployed. The withdrawal comes as the Afghan government and the Taliban have been holding talks to try and reach a political settlement to end decades of conflict. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said Afghanistan must construct a safe country for its citizens as NATO withdraws its military forces from the country after 20 years.
In the light of the US decision to withdraw, foreign and defense ministers of NATO discussed the way forward today and decided that we will start the withdrawal of NATO Resolute Support Mission forces by May 1st. Our drawdown will be orderly, coordinated and deliberate. We plan to complete the withdrawal for all our troops within a few months. This is not the end of our relationship with Afghanistan, but rather the start of a new chapter. NATO allies and partners will continue to stand with the Afghan people. But it's now for the Afghan people to build a sustainable peace.
September 11th is a highly symbolic date, coming 20 years to the day of Al-Qaeda's attacks on the United States that prompted the then-President George W. Bush to launch the conflict. The war has cost the lives of 2,400 American service members and consumed an estimated $2 trillion. US troop members in Afghanistan peaked at more than 1 lakh in 2011. After withdrawing, the United States and NATO aim to rely on Afghan military and police forces, which they have developed with billions of dollars in funding to maintain security, though peace talks are struggling and the insurgency is resilient. With Bureau Inputs, DD India.
And US Senator Lindsey Graham, a key Republican voice on issues of America's military, decried the decision of US President Joe Biden to start withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan from May. Graham asserted that maintaining a residual force of American and coalition forces in Afghanistan would be a prudent deterrence against re-emergence of Al-Qaeda and would ensure the Taliban adheres to any negotiated agreement.
We gain the idea that the war is now over and Joe Biden ended the longest war in American history. With all due respect to President Biden, you have not ended the war, you have extended it. You have made it bigger, not smaller. You're going to do to us what you did in Iraq, put us in a world of hurt.
And ahead of Joe Biden's announcement on withdrawal of troops, CIA Director William Burns said Washington's ability to collect intelligence and act on threats will diminish when US troops have left Afghanistan. In his testimony to the Senate Intelligence Committee, Burns said CIA, with all its partners, will try to provide the kind of strategic warning to others in the US government that enables to address threat if it starts to materialize.
When the time comes for the U.S. military to withdraw, the U.S. government's ability to collect and act on threats will diminish. That's simply a fact. It is also a fact, however, that after withdrawal, whenever that time comes, the CIA and all of our partners in the U.S. government will retain a suite of capabilities, some of them remaining in place, some of them that will generate, that can help us to anticipate and contest any rebuilding effort.
Meanwhile, Britain's Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab on Wednesday said United Kingdom will support an orderly departure of forces from Afghanistan. He said the UK stands with NATO and the people of Afghanistan to support a more stable, peaceful future for the country and the wider region. We will support an orderly departure of our forces while building up Afghanistan's capacity for self-governance and continuing counter-terrorism support to protect the gains made over the last 20 years. So while the US talks about withdrawal from Afghanistan as ending a 20-year-old war, let's take a closer look at the possible implications of this decision on the region, particularly Afghanistan. The first, Taliban's grim record of violence. During their 5 years in power from 1996 to 2001, the Taliban operated as one of the world's most oppressive and theocratic regimes. There is little in their public posturing behavior during the group's years of insurgency to suggest that much has changed, including the continuing brutal attacks, even while peace talks have been on. Let's move on to the next point. Taliban versus the Afghan Forces. Strategic experts have repeatedly expressed skepticism about the ability of Afghan forces to hold out for long once the Americans leave. The Taliban have spent the past months capturing bases and outposts, installing checkpoints near the capital cities around the country. So far, they've deliberately stopped short of directly attacking these hubs as they negotiate their return to power with both the United States and with the Afghan government. Moving on to the next point, the power sharing as it will exist between the Taliban and the local government. The Taliban commitment to negotiations with any entity other than the Americans has always been ambiguous. It perceives the local government as a puppet of Americans. Kabul government has repeatedly also expressed its belief that the Taliban's true intention is to seize power by force once the Americans leave. Moving on to the next point, the fate of women and minorities in Afghanistan after US withdrawal takes place. The contemporary Taliban have made a series of unambiguous statements about the role of women that cannot be regarded as reassuring by any means. Taliban negotiators have at times said they support women's rights, but only under strict Islamic law. Freedom, education for girls will be a serious concern. Also, during the Taliban era, there was widespread persecution, even massacres of minority communities like the Hazara. All that, one fears, may return. Moving on, let's now also talk about India's concern as India being a key development partner of Afghanistan. The first one would be reorienting diplomacy with the Taliban. Whatever may be India's traditional opposition to the extremist organization like the Taliban, once America leaves and power sharing deal between the Afghan government and Taliban is worked out, Taliban is going to become a mainstream recognized political force, and India will have to take that into account in engaging with Afghanistan as a nation. Let's move on to the next concern that India would have with this development: resurgence of terrorism in the region. Withdrawal of America and NATO forces may provide a fertile ground for terrorist organizations such as Al-Qaeda, Islamic State. India's key concern is the use of Afghan soil for anti-India terror campaign and propaganda. The concern is not unfounded. Taliban era earlier saw the country becoming a safe haven for terrorist organizations. It may happen again. Moving on, importantly, the Pakistan factor. India's concern for the future of Afghanistan is bolstered by Pakistan's growing influence in the region, thanks to its ideological and strategic proximity to the Taliban. As the Pakistan-Taliban axis comes into play, India will have to rework its channels of influence in the region. And finally, let's look at the key concern that India would have. It's about the future of development partnership with Afghanistan. From Afghan parliament building to the other critical infrastructure to capacity building in terms of manpower, India has over the recent years established itself as a key development partner for Afghanistan. It has also fostered close relationship with people-to-people contact and exchanges. But the road ahead is unlikely to remain the same, with new stakeholders coming into the picture. So those were broadly the concerns and implications of US's exit from Afghanistan. Let's look at some other stories. A bipartisan resolution was introduced in the US House of Representatives condemning China's genocide of Uyghurs and other minorities, while urging President Joe Biden to refer the crackdown to the United Nations. The resolution seeks multilateral sanctions against the Chinese government in UN Security Council and other unspecified actions to bring the genocide to an end. This comes a day after US Senators Marco Rubio and Chris Coons introduced bipartisan legislation wherein people of China's Uyghur minority community are facing government repression would become eligible for prioritized US refugee status. And now let us look at news from Europe. The US has announced sanctions against Russia in response to what it says are cyber attacks and other hostile acts. The measures are aimed at deterring Russia's harmful foreign activities, the White House said. The United States announced economic sanctions against Russia and the expulsion of 10 diplomats in retaliation for what Washington says is Kremlin's US election interference, a massive cyber attack and other hostile activity. US President Joe Biden ordered a widening of restrictions on US banks trading in Russian government debt, expelled 10 diplomats who include alleged spies, and sanctioned 32 individuals alleged to have tried to meddle in the 2020 presidential elections, the White House said in a statement. Biden's executive order sends a signal that the United States will impose costs in a strategic and economically impactful manner on Russia if it continues or escalates its destabilizing international action. Meanwhile, the Russian government has denied the allegations and called any new sanctions as illegal. It summoned US ambassador for tough talks and says it will respond shortly.
Ответ на санкции будет неотвратимым.
The response to the sanctions will be unavoidable. Washington must realize that they have to pay for the deterioration of bilateral relations. The United States of America are fully responsible for what is happening. I would also like to say that the Russian Foreign Ministry has summoned the US ambassador. We will share with you additional information on the outcome of this conversation, which will be uneasy for the US side.
По итогам этого разговора, который будет.
Moving on, a Russian court has handed Lyubov Sobol, a close ally of jailed Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny, a suspended sentence of 1 year's community service on Thursday. The court found her guilty of using violence to trespass on private property. The case relates to an incident last December wherein Sobol had tried to doorstep a Russian secret agent. Let's now shift focus to news coming in from Asia. In Bangladesh, Poila Boishakh and the holy month of Ramzan this year too is being observed under spectre on the coronavirus pandemic. Bangladesh went into a complete lockdown from 14th of April. People in capital Dhaka shopped for food, for breakfast and distributed food packets. Mosque volunteers handed out food packets to those who were unable to buy at the break of the fast. The High Commission of India in Bangladesh has temporarily suspended the operations at all its visa centers across Bangladesh.
World is battling COVID-19. All the countries are doing what they can to save the lives of their citizens. Restrictions have been tightened across the globe to control the situation. Bangladesh began the first day of the 8-day-long hard lockdown on Wednesday, with roads having low traffic and most of the shops in Dhaka being closed except those for daily essentials. Even on 14th April, which happens to be the Bangla New Year, and Poila Boishakh, which are considered days of celebration for people, the streets wore a deserted look. Bangladesh is battling hard to control the spread of coronavirus with lockdown since April 5th. The second phase of the lockdown, called Hard Lockdown, started on Wednesday, 14th April and will continue till 21st of April. Police have set up checking points on major streets to control the movement of people. As per the government directive, no public transport is allowed to operate in the city. Buses are off-road, trains, waterways and flights have been cancelled. Offices are closed, only the factories are open under the supervision of a specially constituted team to ensure compliance with health directives of the government. A system of movement pass has been put in place by the police to allow people to come out of their homes in unavoidable and emergency cases. The High Commission of India in Bangladesh has temporarily suspended the operations at all its visa centers across Bangladesh. The High Commission announced on Wednesday that the visa operations have been suspended in view of the lockdown implemented by the government of Bangladesh from 14th of April. The visa operations had resumed functioning in October last year after remaining suspended for more than 6 months due to the COVID-19 pandemic which hit Bangladesh in March 2019. Visa was being issued under all categories except the tourist visa from the Indian visa application centers in Bangladesh. People in Dhaka shopped for food to breakfast and distributed food packets on April 14th, which marked the first day of Ramadan in the country amid a coronavirus lockdown. Despite the majority of shops being closed, some wayside stalls briefly opened to sell produce and fried foods for iftar. Mosque volunteers handed out food to those unable to buy food to break the fast. The COVID-19 cases in Bangladesh continues to remain at an alarming level as the highest ever death toll of 96 was reported from the country on Wednesday. With Bureau Inputs, DD India.
And South Korean President Moon Jae-in has ordered officials to explore petitioning an international court over Japan's decision to release water from its Fukushima nuclear plant amid protests by fisheries and environmental groups. Japan unveiled plans on Tuesday to release more than 1 million tons of contaminated water into the sea from the plant, which was crippled by the 2011 earthquake and tsunami, starting in about 2 years after filtering it to remove harmful isotopes. Here's more.
The ties between South Korea and Japan are getting strained. Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga announced on Tuesday the government's decision to discharge contaminated wastewater in Fukushima prefecture into the sea despite domestic and international opposition. Experts say the Japanese government's plan to dump radioactive water into the sea is a reckless decision that defies the will of the people. Koyama Ryota, a professor of the Faculty of Food and Agricultural Sciences with Fukushima University, believes this is a unilateral decision made by the Japanese government. The Japanese society believes that the proper disposal of radioactive wastewater from the Fukushima nuclear power plant is related to the international public interest and the vital interests of neighboring countries, so all parties concerned should participate in the process so as to effectively avoid further damage to the marine environment, food safety and human health.
It has yet to disclose detailed messages on how to dispose of nuclear wastewater and which research institutes it is working with on wastewater treatment. Tokyo Electric Power has made a lot of mistakes leading to a confidence loss among the public. Can it really regain the trust through actions in the next 2 years? In addition, the Japanese government's decision to discharge nuclear wastewater into the sea at present also left it a negative image. Can it reverse this negative image? If not, the nuclear wastewater discharge into the sea may meet big obstacles in the future.
After this, South Korean President Moon Jae-in ordered officials on Wednesday to explore petitioning an international court over Japan's decision to release water from its Fukushima nuclear plant.
President Moon called for proactively looking into ways to refer Japan's decision to release contaminated water from its nuclear plant to the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, including filing for an injunction. He said, "I cannot help but say that there are many concerns here in Republic of Korea about Japan's decision to release contaminated water from its nuclear plant as the country that is geologically closest and shares the sea with Japan." President Moon said Ambassador Koichi Aiboshi is probably well aware of the concerns of the South Korean government and people and asked him to convey such worries to Japan.
Japan unveiled plans to release more than 1 million tons of contaminated water into the sea from the plant crippled by a 2011 earthquake and tsunami, starting in about 2 years after filtering it to remove harmful isotopes. South Korea strongly protested against the decision, summoning Koichi Aiboshi, Tokyo's ambassador in Seoul. A series of protests against the move by politicians, local officials, fishermen and environmental activists took place in South Korea on Wednesday, including in front of the Japanese embassy in Seoul and consulates in the port city of Busan and on Jeju Island. Bilateral relations between Seoul and Tokyo are already at a very low point, while it improve or hit another low remains to be seen. With Bureau Inputs, DD India.
India's Union Minister for Environment, Forests and Climate Change, Prakash Javadekar, addressed an event titled From Paris to Glasgow, Stepping Up Global Action on Climate Change in their bid to tackle environmental issues at a panel discussion on climate change. Jean-Yves Le Drian, Minister for Europe and Foreign Affairs of France, was also present at the event. Addressing the function, Union Minister said that India is the only G20 country to negotiate on Paris Treaty, and India has shown more than it had promised.
I am very happy to report that India is the only G20 country to walk the talk on Paris Agreement. United Nations Environment Programme, UNEP, Climate Tracker, Climate Performance Index, all such surveys have adjudged India one of the best countries on performance from 95 to 2000, from 2015 to 2020. Many countries have forgotten their pre-2020 commitments. We have done more than what we promised. And therefore, we are the only G20 country. We have increased our tree cover by 15,000 square kilometers. We have declared 26 million hectares target of land restoration. The degraded land to be restored is 26 million hectares by 2030. And we are also walking the track there. We have reduced our emission intensity by 26% as I stand before you. We have promised 35% by 2030, we'll achieve more. But if I say that we'll achieve more and Prime Minister has declared 450 gigawatts.
Moving on, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi addressed the 2021 edition of the Raisina Dialogue via video conferencing. This is the first time since it was started that the prestigious conference on geopolitics is being organized virtually. This year, the dialogue has some 50 sessions with participation of 150 speakers across 50 countries and multilateral organizations. Prime Minister Modi, in his inaugural intervention, called for a rethink on the global order to make it more human-centric in the light of the global pandemic and its impact on the world economy and politics.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi has said that the current pandemic and its effects have presented an opportunity to the world leaders to reshape the global order and reorient the thinking. Addressing the Raisina Dialogue 2021 virtually on Tuesday, Prime Minister said that the world is at a watershed moment due to the COVID-19 pandemic, as the nations were underprepared to deal with the challenge.
It is not too late even now. The mistakes and misdeeds of the past 7 decades need not constrain our thinking for the future. The COVID-19 pandemic has presented us an opportunity to reshape the world order, to reorient our thinking. We must create systems that addresses the problems of today and challenges of tomorrow.
Prime Minister lamented the fact that the world order that emerged after the 2 world wars was essentially to prevent World War III. Instead, world leaders could have addressed issues which affect humanity. Prime Minister further added that the race for economic development and competition pushed real issues to the back burner.
All the governments of the world at all levels are trying to contain and control this pandemic. Why did it come to this? Is it perhaps because in the race of economic development, the concern for welfare of humanity has been left behind? Is it perhaps because in the age of competition, the spirit of cooperation has been forgotten?
Prime Minister further said that despite limited resources, India walked the talk and helped many nations in the fight against the global pandemic. He also reassured the world that India will continue to share its expertise and resources.
We will continue to share our experiences, our expertise, and also our resources with the entire humanity in the fight against the pandemic.
Meanwhile, External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar stressed on South-South cooperation, humanitarian assistance, disaster resistance in the virtual meeting of the Raisina Dialogue 2021.
Even before the pandemic, if you look in terms of humanitarian assistance, whether it was an earthquake in Nepal or a civil war in Yemen or a cyclone in Mozambique or a typhoon in Fiji or a mudslide in Sri Lanka, or whether it is, taking the Paris agenda forward through, initiatives like the International Solar Alliance, or, how to respond collectively towards disaster resilience. So there are very practical ways by which we have demonstrated our belief in the world as a family.
Vaccine Maitri is a humanitarian initiative taken by India to provide Made in India vaccines to the countries around the world. And India has once again demonstrated that it is possible to share resources and expertise with the world despite challenges, and possible to work for a united and a better global order. Bureau Report, DD India.
Military jets and helicopters flew in formation over Israel on Thursday as the country marked its Independence Day, freer of coronavirus restriction than what it was a year ago. Customary barbecue beach holiday celebrations were back in evidence for families who were locked down under mandatory curfew in 2020. Celebrations began late on Wednesday during the back-to-back Memorial Day and Independence Day holidays. Israeli President Reuven Rivlin hosted the Independence Day ceremony at his residence, honoring 120 soldiers. Let's now scan through some more news and developments from across the world in fast-forward mode.
Argentine protesters marched on the International Monetary Fund in Buenos Aires with a big basket demonstrating their symbolic demands. The South American country attempts to renegotiate its multi-billion-dollar debts to the IMF and the Paris Club group of creditor nations. The centre-left President Alberto Fernandez government is scrambling to renegotiate the roughly $45 billion the country owes to the IMF. In Mexico, government has deployed over 12,000 officials in southern part to deal with an increase in migrant arrivals. Foreign Minister Marcelo Ebrard said that flows of migrant children were at unprecedented levels. Ebrard also said that officials consisting of National Guard members, National Migration Authority staff and health and welfare officials had been working in various southern states to help tackle the challenge. St. Vincent took a cemented grey look after rain mixed with the hot ash emitting from the Le Soufrière volcano blanketed the whole city. The volcano had its most powerful explosion on Monday after decades of inactivity, pumping dark clouds of ash some 10 kilometers into the air. The residents steered clear of outdoors as the ash clogged the air and fused with the rain, making it difficult to walk or drive. No deaths have been reported so far, but roughly a third of the island is off limits and airspace remains closed, while power and water supply is intermittent in some communities. The eruption prompted evacuation of many nearby residents. In Spain, a massive fire broke out inside an industrial park near Cesena. Thick plumes of smoke were also visible in capital Madrid. According to Madrid Region Emergency Services, at least 4 industrial buildings covering an area of 52,000 square meters were affected by collapsed decks and burned down walls. A gas station near the fire was also evacuated to avoid greater damage. However, no injuries or fatalities were reported and the cause of the fire is not yet known. Guillermo Lasso, who unexpectedly won Ecuador's presidency, has again vowed to revitalize the country's economy. He won on the promises to revive an economy battered by the coronavirus. Lasso, a banker, took 52% of the vote in the runoff following a campaign that pitted his free market economics against economist Andres Arauz's pledges of a return to socialist largesse. Lasso's victory was likely held by a ballot-spoiling campaign that left 1 in 6 ballots void. Former American film producer Harvey Weinstein has been indicted in California on charges of sexual assault. The 69-year-old producer appeared before New York court proceedings over whether to extradite him. California's criminal case against Weinstein covers alleged attacks on 5 women from 2004 to 2013 in the Los Angeles. The white police officer whose fatal shooting of a young black motorist during a traffic stop in a Minneapolis suburb ignited 3 nights of protest and civil unrest was arrested on Wednesday and charged with second-degree manslaughter. Kim Potter, a 26-year veteran of the Brooklyn Center Police Department who turned in her badge on Tuesday, was taken into custody by agents of the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. She was booked into Hennepin County Jail and charged with second-degree manslaughter for the fatal shooting of Dawn Wright on Sunday in Brooklyn Center, where she will await her first court appearance in the case.
Stories now from a more intimate world around us. Stories that inspire, stories beyond headlines.
"12 black and white Magellanic penguins have been returned to the chilly seas off the Atlantic coast of Argentina after they were rescued and rehabilitated from health issues including malnutrition and anemia. It was a sight to behold as the boot-high penguins waddled down a windswept sandy beach after being released by conservationists. Many wanted to capture the scene for photos with onlookers before taking the plunge back into the sea and swimming off to freedom. In Vietnamese village Hon Thien, a street has been converted into an open-air art gallery. Sometimes called the Mural Street, it features 40 large-scale 3D paintings. The walls that were thought to have deteriorated have transformed into canvases that feature beautiful 3D murals. In addition to impressing travelers, it has also led to the creation of a new name for the place, which is Mural Village. A teacher from Vietnam's An Giang province has been able to turn simple black and white rocks that were originally used in construction into works of art that feature the local identity and his love for his homeland. The rocks are pounded, sorted, washed and dried before being used for painting. A total of 500 drones lit up the sky in the shape of a rocket launch in Russia's Veliki Novgorod on Monday to mark the 60th anniversary of Yuri Gagarin's historic space flight. Gagarin became the first human in outer space on the 12th of April in 1961 in one of the Soviet Union's most important Cold War victories and a pivotal moment in its space race with the United States. The town's residents admired the swarm drone display illuminating the skies with devices lined up in synchronized light displays forming a rocket, satellite and an orbital ship. As Russia celebrated the 60th anniversary of Yuri Gagarin in space, a panda at the Moscow Zoo had his own cosmic experience. Ruyi, the panda, had his chance to lift off on a bamboo rocket made especially for him by zoo workers. The bear-sized rocket, which took several days to construct, held Ruyi's attention only momentarily before the large panda decided to leave space exploration for another day and instead chose to nibble on some bamboo. The night sky lit up bright as a meteor shot across the South Florida and the Bahamas. Security cameras and eyewitnesses were quick to capture the moment as the asteroid hurtled into the Earth's atmosphere at high speed, exploded in a burst of light and burned up. The meteor appeared to be visible on the GOES-16 geostationary lightning mapper and that it burned up on the Sunshine State's Atlantic coast. Spanish freediver and choreographer Ariadna Hafez performed a breathtaking tango 10 meters underwater for Tang O, a 3-minute film directed and produced by Frenchman Bastien Soliel. The movie was made by trained free divers and every scene shot 10 meters below the surface with no air assistance. Soliel says the dancer and camera person free dived 120 times to complete the film. India's Padmaja Naidu Himalayan Zoological Park and Mountaineering Institute recently welcomed 3 snow leopard cubs. The mother leopard was captured feeding the adorable cubs inside their enclosure, as vets have asked for minimal exposure for the newborns. Zima and Namkha, the leopard couple which recently became parents, are the ones who also gave 2 other cubs to the park 3 years ago. With the latest addition, the zoo and their conservation and breeding facility now houses 12 snow leopards. The institute is also working on a plan to release the cats into the wild. The holy month of Ramadan has begun across the globe. Like every year, in Brunei Darussalam, food stalls will be set up and become the main attention for the public who wishes to buy food for breaking the fast. This year is, however, different. The places will be setting up food stalls will have to adhere to all necessary COVID-19 protocols. This includes open-air stall managers must prepare Brew Health QR codes exclusively for their premise and print the QR codes in sufficient quantity and place in several suitable areas. It will be limited to only 1,000 customers at a time.
Let's turn on the time machine and see this week in history.
On April 12th in the year 1945, the then US President Franklin Roosevelt breathed his last in his office. A statesman and politician, Roosevelt was the 32nd President of the United States and the only one to win 4 presidential terms. He served as President between 1933 to 1945. He could not complete his last term in office, and after his death, the then Vice President Harry Truman completed his term in office. It was on April 12th in 1947 that then renowned American novelist Tom Clancy was born in Baltimore. Clancy was well known for his suspenseful and thriller novels, which were generally based on military technology and espionage. He rose to fame with his first novel, The Hunt for Red October, which also inspired a Hollywood movie by the same name. The famous character of Jack Ryan is also believed to have been taken from one of his works. A day that marked an important event in the history of medicine. It was on April 12th in 1955 that the polio vaccine developed by Jonas Salk was declared safe for use. The announcement was made following one of the largest clinical trials for vaccines. The development came as a relief to the world that crippled by the rising cases of polio. It was on April 12th in the year 1961 when Russian cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first ever human being to travel into space. Aboard Soviet spacecraft for Vostok 1, Gagarin also became the first human being to orbit Earth for 108 minutes, traveling at 27,000 kilometers per hour. On April 13th, the year 1941, Russia and Japan signed a 5-year pact to neutrality in World War II. The impact of this agreement was long-reaching in its effect on the nations directly involved to make war, as well as on other nations, as the second global war of the 20th century engulfed the world. In the year 1945, on the 13th of April, Vienna, the first foreign capital to be occupied by Adolf Hitler, was liberated by Soviet troops. During World War II, Soviet troops occupied and annexed a number of countries. On 13th April 1951, former Prime Minister of British Guiana, Chedi Zagan, was jailed for 6 months. He had won the 1953 elections, but the governor dismissed him because of his communist policies. On 14th April 1931, Spain was declared a republic after King Alfonso abdicated and fled the country. The Spanish Republic, commonly known as the Second Spanish Republic, was the form of government in Spain from 1931 to 1939. On this day in 1951, British trade unionist and statesman Ernest Bevin died. He was one of the most powerful British Union leaders in the first half of the 20th century. He also proved to be a forceful Minister of Labour and National Service during World War II and a Foreign Secretary in the immediate post-war period. On 14th April in 1995, female panda Yan Yan from Beijing arrived at the Berlin Zoo on a 5-year loan. Yan Yan was sent to Berlin in the hope that she would produce offspring with the zoo's mascot, Bao Bao, who at 26 was the world's oldest panda in captivity. Yan Yan died without bearing cubs. Global Scan Desk, DD India.
Let's now take a look at COVID updates from across the world.
Moderna Inc. has said that its COVID-19 vaccine still showed strong protection against the illness 6 months after people received their second shot, with efficacy of more than 90% against all cases of COVID-19 and more than 95% against severe COVID-19. The company has also started testing new versions of the vaccine that target a concerning new variant of the coronavirus, which was first identified in South Africa. It said both versions of the vaccine that it is testing, including a multivalent vaccine that combines the newly designed vaccine with the previous one, increased neutralizing antibody titers against variants of concerns in mice, with the multivalent providing the broadest level of immunity. Pharmaceutical giant Pfizer's CEO has said that the company has ramped up production of its COVID-19 vaccine and can deliver 10% more doses than expected to the United States by the end of May. Company said it had conducted an assessment of the vaccine's safety data and had found no evidence of blood clots. The White House said it was confident that there would be no significant impact on the vaccination plan in the world's hardest hit country, where almost half of all adults have now received at least one dose. US President Joe Biden on Tuesday sought to allay concerns that the pause in inoculations of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine for COVID-19 would not negatively impact the ability of Americans to be vaccinated. Biden suggested that neither the Pfizer vaccine nor the Moderna vaccine had the same trouble as the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, and there was as much as 600 million doses of those two vaccine types available. US federal health agencies recommended pausing the use of Johnson & Johnson's COVID-19 vaccine for at least a few days after 6 women under age 50 developed rare blood clots after receiving the shot. The surging COVID-19 outbreak in Brazil is increasingly affecting younger people. The hospitals in Brazil last month admitted the majority of patients in intensive care aged 40 or younger. For the first time since the outbreak reached Brazil last year, 52% of ICU beds were filled by patients aged 40 or younger. Other factors, such as the vaccination of the elderly and the behavior of younger people who might feel less concerned about going out and socializing, could also be influencing the data. Brazil is currently the global epicenter of the COVID-19 pandemic, with daily deaths last week surpassing 4,000. The outbreak is pushing hospitals to breaking point, with many patients dying before an ICU bed becomes available. In Argentina, dozens of demonstrators gathered outside Brazil's embassy in Buenos Aires on Wednesday protesting against President Jair Bolsonaro over his handling of the coronavirus pandemic. Protesters carried banners with Bolsonaro's face and chanted slogans for Bolsonaro's removal outside the embassy's security perimeter. President Jair Bolsonaro has been widely criticized for his handling of the pandemic. Israel will start allowing the limited entry of vaccinated tourist groups next month. Officials believe that Israel's own inoculation campaign has sharply brought down COVID-19 infections. All foreign visitors will be required to present a negative PCR report before boarding a flight to Israel and a serological test to prove their vaccination upon arrival at Ben Gurion Airport near Tel Aviv. Last week, after a public outcry, the government started allowing non-Israeli immediate relatives to visit Israel for special events such as births and weddings. The Dutch government on Tuesday has extended most pandemic lockdown restrictions, including a nighttime curfew, as Prime Minister Mark Rutte cited rising COVID-19 infection rates and hospitals near capacity. Dutch Prime Minister Rutte said that all measures must remain in place until 28 April. Current measures in the Netherlands, which has seen 1.3 million coronavirus cases and over 16,800 deaths. The Dutch National Institute for Health said on Tuesday new cases rose by 6% in the week through April 13th to 51,240, resuming an upward trend in place since January after a slight decline in early April. As of April 4th, roughly 12% of Dutch people had received at least one COVID-19 shot. In a blow for Southern California moviegoers, the ArcLight Cinemas and Pacific Theatres will be closing theatres at all 16 locations due to huge loss faced amid COVID-19. ArcLight's stable includes the prized Cinerama Dome Hollywood. The dome, built in 1963 by Pacific Theatres' parent company, is the crown jewel of the small theatre complex that was reconstructed in the early 2000s. In view of the festive season, Turkey imposed new restrictions for first 2 weeks of the Islamic holy month of Ramadan on Wednesday evening to contain surging coronavirus infections, warning that tougher curbs could follow if case numbers did not drop. Speaking after a cabinet meeting on Tuesday, Erdogan said the duration of a weekday curfew has been extended, as well as announced limitations on intercity travel and public transport. The Turkish president also banned all events in closed spaces until after Ramadan, and further said the new measures, which went into effect on Wednesday night, could be tightened within 2 weeks. Global Scan Desk, DD India.
To mark 100 days to go until the Olympic Games Tokyo 2020 begin, the organizing committee unveiled a giant set of Olympic rings on top of Mount Takao that is located in Tokyo. Statues of Olympic and Paralympic mascots at the Tokyo Metropolitan Government Headquarters. India's Sports Minister Kiren Rijiju is expecting an unprecedented double-digit medal haul from the Indian athletes in the upcoming Tokyo Olympics. He was speaking at a virtual webinar organized to mark the 100 days countdown to the Tokyo Games, which is scheduled to begin on July 23rd.
Tokyo Olympic and Metropolitan officials unveiled statues of the Olympic mascots to celebrate the 100-day countdown to the Games amid raging coronavirus infections in the country. Tokyo Governor Yuri Gagarin said she was determined to make the event a success during a ceremony at the Metropolitan Government Building.
The fight against an invisible enemy, the coronavirus, is behind the 1-year postponement, and it has been a major ordeal for humanity. But I would like us to overcome the fight against the coronavirus and make the Games a memorable event.
Indian sports officials are expecting a medal haul in double digits at the Tokyo Olympics. Speaking at a webinar to mark 100 days to the Games, both Sports Minister Kiren Rijiju and IOA President Narendra Batra insisted it is a realistic expectation given the number of qualified athletes.
मुझे लगता है कि टोक्यो ओलंपिक्स में अगर भाग्य साथ दिया, तैयारी तो पूरा है. हमारे प्लेयर्स का तैयारी में कोई कमी नहीं है. बस कभी-कभी ऑन दैट डे उस पर्टिकुलर दिन में उसका क्या किस्मत है और क्या लक है जो है वो मेडल तय करता है ना. बहुत कम मार्जिन से भी हार जीत होता है, तो इसके लिए बताना मुश्किल है, लेकिन उम्मीद है.
Tokyo residents expressed concern about holding the Summer Olympics during the COVID-19 pandemic. Olympics organizers are facing a deluge of challenges and growing uncertainty as pandemic rages around the world, affecting decision on everything from athlete safety to spectator numbers in the venues. The biggest headache is the resurgent coronavirus, and some parts of Japan, including Tokyo, are implementing stricter restrictions to halt the rise in the infections.
The situation is very difficult now, but the athletes are pushing themselves and preparing for the games. For the athletes to be able to stand at the starting line with confidence, the support of the people will become very important. Just the athletes doing their best will not enable success for the Tokyo Games. So I hope that the words of encouragement from as many people as possible will reach the athletes. I pray that the games will be a success.
With more than 65% of the athletes now qualified for the games, only a few Olympic qualification events remain. Some of those will be part of the final test event program taking place in Tokyo 2020's venues between now and the games. DD India.
And Paris Saint-Germain will face Manchester City, and Real Madrid will take on Chelsea in this season's UEFA Champions League semi-finals. Liverpool lost 3-1 to Real Madrid at the Bernabeu in their first leg match and failed to turn it around at Anfield, crashing out of the tournament in the process. Chelsea made it into the semi-finals after securing a 2-1 aggregate victory over Porto. Elsewhere, Manchester City's quest for a maiden Champions League title will continue after they saw off Borussia Dortmund. More in this Champions League roundup.
Real Madrid set up a Champions League semi-final meeting with Chelsea by keeping Jurgen Klopp's side at bay in a goalless draw at Anfield. Real arrived at Anfield protecting a 3-1 lead from the first leg. Jurgen Klopp's men had endless opportunities to score, with Mo Salah missing an early chance. Liverpool gave it everything for the 90 minutes, but it was the lack of cutting edge that has characterized so many of their Anfield displays this season. Manchester City are through to the semi-finals of the Champions League for only the second time after sealing victory over Borussia Dortmund in the last 8. English star Jude Bellingham scored his first goal to put the German side ahead early on in the first half. Kevin De Bruyne went close to an equalizer before Riyad Mahrez netted a penalty to make it 1-1. Just as he did in the first leg, Phil Foden stepped up to make sure of the victory with a long-range strike. Pep Guardiola's side will play Mauricio Pochettino's PSG in the last 4 after they beat Bayern Munich. Kante's tireless midfield performance steered Chelsea to a first Champions League semi-final in 7 years despite the 1-0 quarter-final second leg loss to Porto. Mehdi Taremi's stunning overhead kick in second half added time put the squeeze on Chelsea, but the Blues still progressed to the semi-finals 2-1 on aggregate. Mason Mount and Ben Chilwell's first leg goals proved decisive in the end. Taremi's late acrobatics planted a seed of doubt, but Porto produced too little too late and Chelsea deservedly moved into the last 4. Paris Saint-Germain knocked holders Bayern Munich out of the Champions League on away goals despite losing the second leg of their quarter-final 1-0. Mauricio Pochettino's men had edged a thrilling first leg clash 3-2 in Munich and saw Neymar denied by the woodwork twice before Eric Maxim Choupo-Moting bundled the Germans in front with a close-range header just before half-time. Bayern, though, could not find another away goal as the League One side PSG progressed to the semi-finals. Missing the injured Robert Lewandowski, the German side lacked their usual ruthlessness up front and were unable to find the second goal that would have continued their trophy defense. Kylian Mbappe thought he had sealed the tie with just over 10 minutes to go, but after breaking clear and firing in the assistant's flag, ruled his efforts out.
And with that, we conclude this edition of Global Scan. We're leaving you with the images that stayed in news this week. Take good care of yourself. Namaskar.